Hello again everyone. So last time you saw me carve this guitar top with an angle grinder, which was pretty exciting stuff. Today we've got a much more sedate job. I'm basically just going to be finalising the shape of these sound holes. That's just simply going to be achieved with these cheap needle files. They're fairly fine files. You could get more specialist wood files to do this if you really wanted to, but these do the job absolutely fine. As you can probably tell if I zoom right in on one of these holes here, there's some quite rough little nicks on the sides of the holes there. There's also the place where I haven't actually even really finalised the shape at all. So there's lots of work to do. I'm just going to have to take it easy, running this file in and along the edges and see where I get to. So there we have it. I've been at the holes for a little while now and they're definitely starting to even up. I wouldn't say they're 100% final finish, but they're definitely getting very close. Just a little tip, I found that when using these small needle files, rather than going up and down like that, trying to file the edges on the holes, it's best to actually go at as steep an angle as you, or shallow an angle rather, as you can, to really kind of touch as much surface area as you can and get like a nice smooth curve. Then obviously as you get into the corners you do have to go like that, but there we go. So you'll notice if you look at the back, last time when I slipped with the angle grinder and got very thin around this area, I decided to patch it up with dust and glue. That does kind of limit my options for sort of thinning these down to a final bevel. The files will get through that dust and glue, but it's actually harder than the wood itself. What I would normally consider doing on the plain wood is to take a gouge or a chisel and just actually work it around the edge there like that. This gouge isn't actually very sharp, so it's not cutting very well, but I was going to give this a good sharpen and see how well it did. Unfortunately though, this isn't going to cut through the dust and glue. Therefore my preferred method would probably actually be to get the Dremel and get a rotary burr or a grinder on it and actually just carve it down by hand very carefully. Now I've tried to use grinders on wood in the past. I tried it with the wenge and they just block up very quickly and become smooth and just start burning the wood, and it's no good really. You can get rotary burrs, which are probably the proper attachment for the job, and they may work, but that would mean having to wait at least 24 hours for them to get here. So I think what I might do in the meantime is I'll sharpen up my gouge and maybe a chisel as well, and I'll have a go at going around these by hand and see how I do. If I can get pretty close, then I might just be able to finish it off with the files. I think we've got about 6 hours to go, something like that, before we miss next day delivery, so let's have a crack at that. So yeah, I don't know how well you can see that, but it's definitely getting down to sort of the right thickness, and now I can work on that with the file and the sandpaper to get that a bit neater. This side's going to be a problem because we've got this filler on here, which means I can't use the gouge on that side. That's all going to have to be hard work with the files or the sandpaper, or I might have to get the rotary tool involved. Onward. So hopefully you can see that I've made good progress in tidying those up. Definitely a lot neater than they were. There is still some slight variance in the thickness, but it's really barely noticeable. It's kind of got to that stage where if you were just using the guitar or, you know, passing by it, you wouldn't notice at all, but if you really examine the fine detail, you might pick up on that kind of thing. So I've kind of got to make the decision as to whether I want to try and tweak it anymore. And to be honest with you, I think as it stands at the moment, I'm okay to leave it. And then if it starts to bug me later down the line, it'll be more difficult if it's when it's glued together. But I can always try and tweak it. But I think I'm to the stage where I'm happy with it. The biggest one is probably, I don't know if you can see, this edge here is actually where we applied the dust and glue filler, and if you get down low and look, you can just about see the bottom edge of the dust and glue peeking through, but there's really not much I can do about that. And normally, unless you're really looking for it in the natural way that you'd hold the guitar or look at it, you can't see that at all. So forgive me if the camera's a little shaky, I'm on the freehand here, but the next thing I want to look at really is control placement. I definitely want to get a volume knob up here where it can be accessible with the pinky, and that's pretty much the normal kind of place to put it. And it's quite normal, I think, to get the tone knob down here somewhere. Note as well that I'm hoping that I can get that knob to kind of go in with the curve of the top of the guitar. And lastly, representing the pickup selector, well, if we're following a McCarthy design, it's going to end up somewhere along here. The only other thing I need to bear in mind is on the back of the body itself, we need to think about a jack socket. And it's probably going to be easier to drill that before we glue as well. But if we can get these 3 holes drilled, and we can get that jack socket hole drilled, and we make sure we've got room somewhere for ground wire underneath, then I think we're about ready to go with the gluing. So the pots I've got are these little mini push-pull pots. I actually prefer push-push pots over push-pull, but I just happen to have some push-pull pots. If we get the calipers on those, we can see they're just short of 7mm, so a 7mm hole should do nicely. We've got the pickup selector switch, which comes in at about just under 12mm, so a 12mm hole for that should do nicely. When it comes to the jack, I don't actually have the jack itself at the moment, but I do have this basic all parts jack cover, and frankly the size of the hole to put the jack through, we just want it as big as possible, but a few mil short on either side of the jack cover. In this instance it looks like my 16mm bit should be about right for that. So to allow the pots to fit flush up against the back of the body at the correct depth, I basically need to remove some material from the back where the holes for the pots are. As you can see, I've already experimented in doing one here, and to do it I used, when the camera refocuses, one of these drill bits. The name of them completely escapes me, but I'm sure you'll find one if you need one. So it was a slightly precarious operation, but I've just effectively popped that in the pillar drill for a little bit of extra stability, held this freehand firmly in place, and then very carefully, without a depth stop, just drilled down till I felt like I was at the right depth. and it seems to have done the job nicely. I now need to do that for the other 2 holes. It's a pretty precarious, bodgy situation, to be honest. I'm sure there's better ways to do this, but I'm just kind of more or less holding it in place freehand and going for it. I'm actually just going to take the slightest little amount off this one that I've already done, because I don't think there's quite enough room to get a washer under there. There we go. I can feel with my finger that can only be about 3mm thick now, so we definitely don't want it anything other than that, and that's going to be perfect. The next one is a little bit trickier because it's right up against this chunk of material here. I'm just going to have to sort of take it slow and hope that it doesn't move too much. I could clamp it, but to be honest with you, this base isn't great for clamping to anyway, so we'll see what happens. We can test it out with the switch, but I think that's going to be okay. Just tested that off camera now and it's fine. We've just got the big one to go. The big one is going to be a bigger switch though, or rather the back of it occupies a slightly wider area. Is that bit going to be big enough? Actually, yes, I think it is. Okay, so very quickly, because we seem to be having camera overheating problems again, I've managed to complete all 3 holes on the back there. Got them down to about maybe 3 or 4mm thick, and they're looking really good. Obviously you could tell I was being very naughty by not having anything pinned down, and as such one of the holes, there's been so much wobble there, it has just nipped a little bit out the side of the hole, but it's nothing to really worry about. It's so small that it will be covered by the controls, no problem whatsoever. So that's great. While the camera was cooling down, I also went ahead as well and used a very similar bit to drill a hole through there. As you can see, it's not a perfect hole, but again, it's going to do the job. absolutely fine, and that's where the jack socket will come out and it will be covered by the control plate. Obviously I can finesse that a little bit if I need to, but I think that's going to be about right. So yeah, I think that's a job well done for today. I think next time we're going to take another look at this wenge back, or wing gear back. It's still feeling rather heavy. I know I've said I've resided to the fact that this guitar is going to be heavy, and I have, but I think I'm going to do one little last ditch attempt maybe, just to remove an extra little chunk of material around where it's not needed on this centre block, because I think that is holding a lot of the weight. And then obviously, all being well, we'll get these things prepared to get them glued together, and then once they're glued together we can go around the edge with a sander and also finalise the top shape with sanders and all the rest of it, and then we can maybe look at drilling pickup cavities. Actually, the pickup cavities will probably come before the final shaping sand, because we don't want to start hacking material out once we've got it down the shape we want. And of course the neck pocket's included in that as well, but it's getting exciting now, starting to look like a guitar. Pretty good, eh? It's not going to be perfect, but I'm starting to love it. Until next time, goodbye.